Hi everyone, I know that you aren't able to come online with the Blackboard issues, so this recording is just to cover Learning Unit 5 of our Media Studies module. As I said also in the WhatsApp group, I've loaded last year's recording on Learning Unit 5 when students were able to join and discuss and what have you, just to bring in other viewpoints and discussion, which we obviously can't have tonight with the problems with Blackboard. So Learning Unit 5 is focusing on ideology and different ideologies within media studies. So we don't only have one ideology, we have multiple critical theories of ideology. And this learning unit is important because it helps us to kind of understand society and break it down in terms of a theoretical model. And when we think of ideology, and I know you've done this in other modules before, and we've spoken about this in Learning Unit 4, but just to reiterate, your ideology is your beliefs or your philosophies that are attributed to either a group of people or an individual person. And what's happened within society is that when someone says that they've got a particular ideology, we often have quite a negative connotation to that, because when people use the terminology of ideology, a lot of people go, oh, well, you think you're better than me because you have a particular viewpoint or a way of judging others. So what has happened is that a lot of people will not speak to their ideologies, but will often speak to a belief or a particular viewpoint. And what happens then is that that's how we see the world, it's how we interact with others. And it can, in some instances, cause that idea of us versus them. But if you have an ideology or a particular viewpoint and you're able to support your viewpoint and you are able to discuss it with others and still listen to others, it is not a bad thing to have a particular perspective. For example, even though I'm not American, my niece is there, so I do follow what's happening within US politics, and I take a more of a democratic approach, believing that everyone should have the right to make their own decisions, that they have the right to voice their opinions when they are researched and supported with evidence, and that no one should be able to make certain decisions for us just because they're in power, for example, with Roe versus Wade and what have you. And I'm more liberal in my viewpoints to do with a lot of different things. But one of my closest friends is more Republican in her perspective. And even though we have completely different ideologies when it comes to the approach and the way that we see the American environment, or politics environment, should I say, we have many interesting and diverse discussions. And even though our ideologies differ, we're still able to have really interesting and engaging discussions. And we listen to one another, and that's what's so important, is that when you're thinking about engaging with media and working with media, your viewpoint is not the viewpoint of everyone in the world. So what you have to think about is being able to empathize and relate to the other side so that they can be heard, and you can either adjust your perspective based on what they've said, or you can say to them, I really respect you and your viewpoint, but I'm going to keep mine. And there's nothing wrong with that. So it's always about making sure that when we're engaging with media, we don't just shut off the other side. Because even if we disagree with something, we need to know what's going on the other side of the discussion to be able to have a properly rounded and balanced viewpoint on what's happening within society. So it's not about pushing other ideals or ideologies down. It's about having your own set and then being able to speak to others, listen to them, listen to their viewpoints, and then using that to either support your views or support the idea of adapting those views. So when we break down our ideology, is that we have neutral and critical perspectives of ideology. So Neutral is what you can call your utopian perspective. It's that where every single belief, ideal, viewpoint, and everything is treated equally, that every group has their own ideologies, but we are able to look at these ideologies. We're able to look at what people say, and no one is criticized based on their viewpoints. No one is talked down upon. No one is seen as less than. And it's this viewpoint that if we lived in a neutral world, if we were Switzerland, as it were, um, and we didn't have our judgy side, we would be able to live in harmony with one another because we could respect other viewpoints while maintaining our own. But the reality is that we live in a critical world. And Karl Marx was actually the theorist who studied this specifically. And what Marx believed is that we have a majority and a minority in absolutely everything. And the views or the groups that are deemed to be dominant are those that have the power and the control in terms of money, politics, culture, and it's that dominant ideology is the one that gets pushed. So even for everyday things, our pop culture that we've spoken about previously, with regards to the clothes that we wear, the trends and what have you, it is not about the biggest group. It's not majority and minority in terms of the number of people, but it's the majority and minority in terms of power. So in terms of what people put value in. So even though we follow the trends that are happening globally, those trends are set by a very small group of people, but they have the control and are able to dominate the ideological viewpoints of what is considered fashionable. So, our 90s resurgence now, where for my generation, millennials, we look at it and go, oh my gosh, how come that's coming back? But those in power and those that control that fashion and the way media portrays us and society and what have you, they are the ones that have the control. So we do have these dominant ideologies. So old school dominant ideologies of men being superior to women must stay at home and look after the kids and shouldn't work, all those kinds of ideologies and those viewpoints. Over time, we end up with the rise of counter ideologies, all right, where the voices of those that were previously silenced are now heard. So this is why you saw the rise of feminism and the shift in viewpoints in terms of toxic masculinity, how we're seeing a shift in terms of racial representation, because we're having these counter ideologies coming forward so that people feel heard and so they feel that they have seen. So again, your position with your money or society and everything often will impact your ideology, and it will also impact how you are critical of other ideologies. And the thing is, even though you are an inherently good person, we still tend to criticize others based on something that they believe in, whether it be religion, whether it be to do with a woman's position within the family, whether it's to do with the way we raise our children. We criticize all the time. And, when we think of our social media platforms and how quick people are to comment on social media, rather than letting people just, be themselves, it just reinforces that our society works in a critical manner. And unfortunately, this is why we have the increase in bullying and suicide rates and depression and anxiety and all those things because of this constant criticizing of one another. All right. So next within this learning unit, what is important for you guys just to be aware of are the different theorists and their different perspectives of ideology. So the first one being that of Karl Marx, when my slide decides to load. So I've just mentioned this already. It's that the elitists, the small groups, often are the ones that hold the dominant ideology, and they push those to the other sectors of society. So it's that we are always following a particular group's viewpoint. So the reason why, for example, we see the white picket fence, big homes, 2, 3 kids, quintessential American dream life as being so amazing is because that is what the media industry and the film industry wanted to portray. That is a incredibly small elitist perspective, but they are the ones that are shaping the way that we see ourselves in the world in which we live. Again, if you look at magazines where we deem a particular body shape or a particular look to be the quintessential representation of perfection, when it is an elitist group of people pushing an ideology. And when we are working with these ideologies and Marx's perspective, we need to remember that this can also lead to false information and viewpoints being pushed. So I don't know if you guys remember, about a decade or so ago, there was the thing, Atkins diets. At the moment, it's Ozempic, and it's how like we go through these trends and fads based on what the people decide are really important, and often they will spread misinformation or false information. So, back in the day when cigarettes came about, doctors prescribed them based on the fact that they were there for your health. They are good, they're stress reliever, and they're amazing. And then it became popular, and people pushed this idea, and then only later did we realize actually it kills. So it's that we just assume what we're being told is truthful, but often information can be falsified. All right, the next is our neo-Marxist perspective, and this was developed by Louis Althusser. Just waiting for the slide to load. So he had a different viewpoint to Karl Marx, or looking at things a bit further, a bit more in depth. Sorry, I'm just waiting for it to load. There we go. And what Althusser believed was what we call the ideological state apparatus, or ISA. And what this theorist believed was that we have our family, our school, our church, our politics, our language, and mass media, and those are the elements that influence us and how we perceive the world. So what he believed was that these are the fundamental aspects of society that push a particular viewpoint. And then that was broken down into our ideological state apparatus, which is our family, our school, and our church. And they are the ones that should be determining our ideologies, influencing the way we think, the way we speak, the way we interact with one another. And our repressive state apparatuses, that's your military and police. And those are the ones that are meant to be keeping you safe, that, we don't speed on the roads, not because we don't want to, or we think it's, any particular reason. It's that we don't speed. Well, we try not to speed because the government tells us that we will be arrested if we speed or if we drink and drive or what have you. It's that we are kept in line and have particular perspectives of society because of the militant view looking after us. When you think of places such as North Korea, which has a significant militant impact, and you look at their schooling and way of life and what have you, even though we as society know that they are a dictatorship and these people have no freedom to be themselves, to them it is correct because that is what they have been indoctrinated to believe. All right. So I'm not going to repeat this information on hegemony. We did that previously in our last lecture. So I'm going to move on to British cultural studies. Just waiting for the slide to load. Sorry guys, I think Blackboard is really taking strain. There we go. All right. So this theory was developed by Stuart Hall, and what he believed was that society is dynamic, that it is ever-changing, it is not stagnant, and it is characterized by the conflicting ideologies rather than a single ideology. So what he's saying here is that because we have so many different ideologies and so many different ways of perceiving the world, it shows us the dynamicism of society. And what he also highlighted was that there is unequal power within society, that a particular group or social group represents the majority, or a small group, should I say, ends up being influential, and those views are then pushed onto the bigger groups within society, and our images that are reflections of reality and the real experience are actually just made up by society. So it's, I'm sure a lot of you have seen on social media, on Instagram and TikTok and that, um, they'll say Instagram versus reality, or TikTok versus reality, where they show these beautiful settings and amazing scenes and what have you, and then they show what it's actually like with all the tourists and everything. And what Stuart Hall also believed was mass media are the ones that communicate the dominant meanings and the dominant views of society. And that when we are going against these dominant ideologies and these dominant views, that is called oppositional ideology. So we're opposing those particular viewpoints, and we're saying, no, it's not okay. I am not standing behind that. All right. And finally, when the slide loads, okay, that when we break down Hall's model of preferred reading a bit further, so following on with that idea of oppositional ideology, is that we have our dominant, we have our negotiated, and we have our oppositional. So dominant is the main views within society. Our negotiated is where people's views can shape and influence the way in which someone can see the world. So your negotiated are your fence sitters. They're not leaning towards one side or the other, but with a bit of information, they can go either to the dominant or the oppositional, which is when people stand against the dominant views of society. So whether that be that old school view that marriage and all that is only a man and a woman, where now the oppositional view would be that any two or more people entering in a relationship together can be considered a marriage, and that everyone has the right to love whoever they want to love. So even though it's a narrative like the LGBTQI plus narrative is quite prominent within our society, it is prominent because it's oppositional, because they're trying to speak out against the years of heteronormity whitewashing everything within society. And on the other side, we have our discursive practices. And this is when any formal or institutional group of people, such as journalists, lawyers, anyone that has knowledge and skills, and have a specialized and rule-governed way of using language and interpreting reality, influence how we as society see things. So journalists have the ability to change perceptions and viewpoints because they're the ones doing the research. Doctors, lawyers, all those people have the ability to change the way we see the world, whether it's setting new legislation, whether it's new medical discoveries, and the jargon and everything surrounding it. They have the ability to change the ideologies within society. We also need to take into consideration the interpretation of a media text that becomes a dynamic negotiation between ideology in the text and the ideology of the person who is reading the text. So we should always be striving to read documents, read articles, have information from people that are different from ourselves, to ensure that we always can, think about our ideologies, question them, and either then stand behind them even firmer, or start to reassess the way in which you perceive the world. Right, that is it for Learning Unit 5, everyone. And I will hopefully see you guys all again soon. Bye.